Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're going to give it just a few minutes to allow everyone to get in. While we wait a minute to get started, if everyone wants to put in their chat where they're joining us from, we'd love to hear. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for our subject matter expert webinar. Today we have Accessible Firebrand. Why can't I use my brand color there? And if not there, then where? We have captions available if you select the CC icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will also be sharing the stream text links in the chat. American Sign Language interpretation is also provided, and microphones are muted to prevent any background noises or disruptions. The chat will be monitored for any general dialogue or technical issues, and we highly encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A. With that being said, I'd like to introduce today's presenters, Mark and Deneb.
Hi. Mark, do you want to share your screen?
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. We should be able to see it now up on the screen here. If there's any issues,
Yep,
let us know.
looks
But if
good.
not, here we go. Yeah. Great. Well, Dana, why don't you take this first part here
Okay.
and we'll get going from there.
So on the slide, we've got our title, Accessible Firebrand. Why can't I use my brand color there? And if not there, then where? So also on this slide, we have a QR code. If you can go back to the other slide, Mark, a QR code for the PDF of the presentation, which should be accessible for those who want it. That will also be going out with the recording in a few days when you get it. But if you wanted to follow along with that right now, you can use the QR code or go to bit.ly/accessible-firebrand. Um,
Perfect.
so there we go.
Hello. How are you guys? We've done this hello already, but just one more time here. My name is Mark, and we've got
And
Deneb. And who are we, you ask? Well, we are two employees of SeaMonster Studios that represent two sides of this conversation that we want to bring to you guys. And I'm going to let Deneb take it from here, and let's talk about some of your
yeah.
qualifications.
So, well, okay. So I actually initially was a high school English teacher that uh, changed over to being a web developer. And I took a coding boot camp in which I got exactly one lecture on accessibility, which was not enough, right? It was impassioned. The guy teaching it was, talked about his grandmother and how she was blind and needed a screen reader. So it was good, but it just wasn't very much information. So when I started my job here at SeaMonster Studios, I was a little confused or didn't quite know what to do when my boss told me, "Okay, Deneb, you're going to be in charge of checking these websites that we're putting out to make sure they're accessible." I said, "How do I do that?" And he said, "I don't know. Figure it out." Right. And so I kind of did. Um, and I went through different trainings to become accredited, got my WAS, CPAC, eventually my CPAC and CWA. But when I got my WAS, the Web Accessibility Specialist certification through IAAP, um, I went back to Wes, my boss, and said, "Well, okay, so I'm certified now. What's my job title?" And he said, "Well, I don't know. Let's figure that out." And so he put a little poll out among our employees, and the uh, the result was my official job title is Captain Accessible. So, which I think is great because I am so passionate about accessibility. I love thinking about ways to make things more accessible for everybody who comes to the site. Um,
Yeah.
but one of the things I noticed as I was going through all this accessibility stuff and trying to make our sites more accessible was there was kind of always a little sort of push and pull uh, with designers um, over color in particular.
Yeah.
Um, and so I thought, well, I want to do a presentation to kind of get rid of that, or to help people with that challenge. And I knew I couldn't do it alone because I'm just the accessibility part of the equation, which is why I brought Mark in. So Mark,
Yeah. Great. Right. So again, we work together at SeaMonster Studios, and I sort of do all the design and branding side of things. So we have a whole team of web designers, but I do mainly logo and branding, and also help on the website as well. But basically, I come from 15 years of that brand identity, brand system management background. And again, I'm more the visual UI brand guy, and I've worked with, the big and the small companies, Starbucks, Microsoft, a lot of these Seattle area Fortune 500 companies, but also a lot of really small companies, people who are starting out wanting to create their brand from scratch. So basically, we both have both sides covered here. And like Deneb was talking about, we just sort of found that we were sort of bumping heads and coming across this from two different perspectives, and thought this would be a really great opportunity to really go over some things that might help us unite and come together and bring some tools. So today, what we're going to pause here and just really make sure we've got the goals in. So what we're going to cover today is this unfortunate tug of war that can sometimes happen between accessibility professionals and the design professionals. And we're going to sort of talk about the pain points that we both experience on both sides. We're going to devil's advocate this a little bit and run through some scenarios that I'm sure you guys have all sort of bumped up against. If you haven't yet, I'm sure you will. The common pitfalls of why we come up against these things, and then also how do we persuade our boss, or in some cases the brand manager. How do we get them to say yes to things that they would normally just say, nope, it's not in the brand guide, or not in the style guide, that type of thing. And then lastly, Deneb and I want to give you 3 takeaways, basically, that you can use as tools to present your case to them. And hopefully you're not walking away empty-handed, and we all learned something today. So that's the goal for today. So we're going to play it up a little bit and get into some boring details and also some fun details and all that stuff. So we hope you guys enjoy this one as much as we do. So let's jump into it here. So when it comes to branding and accessibility, again, Deneb and I, we've sort of experienced this together. It can sometimes, you would imagine it might be a match made in heaven, right? Well, as we have known, sometimes that is not always the case, right? But what do we got here? What do we see here, Deneb?
so on this slide we have um, a still shot of a commercial from I don't know, was it the early 2000s maybe?
Yeah.
Um, where it was the PC guy and the Mac guy, and they were kind of riffing off each other. So the PC guy is in a button-up shirt and a suit and a tie. The Mac guy is just kind of slouching over in his comfortable, kind of cooler clothes.
Yeah, so kind of the casual versus formal, nerd versus cool guy or something like that. And basically just presenting as the two different sides of the spectrum. And on this slide, we have the dog on the left and then the cat on the right. Again, there's dog people, there's cat people, and we'll just sort of leave it at that. And then this one too, not to get too into the weeds here, but on the left you've got the icon for the Democratic Party, and on the right the icon for the Republican Party. Again, two-party system, two different sides of the coin, and in some ways it can feel like that within this world as well. Branding on one side of the argument, and then accessibility on the other side of the argument. And we wish that it would not be like that, but sometimes it does feel like it is branding versus accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
And, on our best days, we can work it out. And then on our other days, we're fighting it out. And we've got our swords drawn, and we're trying to work this out from a, he said, she said type thing. And that just is an unfortunate, circumstance. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the tug of war of priorities. And each side has legitimate concerns, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with the design side being beauty, and with the accessibility side being usability. And again, it sort of can turn into this I'm right, no, I'm right type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, it's just like a lose-lose scenario. Design loses, accessibility and usability loses, and at the end of the day, the end user is the one who loses. And so, we're playing this out, we're playing this up a little bit, but really that's what we want to try to avoid, and we want to try to figure out what are some ways that we can put these tools together so that we can all come out on the top and have a win-win scenario. So that's what we're doing today. And again, thank you guys for being here.
Yeah.
And we're going to jump to this next one, which now we're going to poke fun at my side, at the branding side.
And I will
Okay.
point out that Mark was the one who put this picture in the slide.
Yes,
But
this is
it's
me.
it's a picture of, I don't know if you guys remember the Seinfeld episode of the Soup Nazi. This is a picture of the Soup Nazi where he's a man in a kind of a chef's outfit. He's got his finger up. He looks very angry. And what's he saying, Mark?
Don't touch my colors. So this is the brand Nazi, right? We've all run into this person, or maybe we are that person, or maybe, at someday you're gonna run into this person. And why are they like that? Why are they so adamant about not messing with the colors and all that stuff, even when all it would really take is just a small little change to make it accessible, and they're unwilling to do that. So that's a bummer thing. And let's dive into that a little bit. So from my perspective, again, coming from the perspective of the design professional, our main priority, we show up every day, we want to deliver a unique, memorable, and consistent brand experience. Okay? And we're trained for years, we go to design school to learn the nuance of how things like typography and color and perspective and all that stuff. There's a whole bunch of principles that sometimes we're born with some inclination towards those, and we refine those over the years. And so I'm going to give you a couple examples of how we use these things to really dial in our design. So color is the biggest thing with that, by the way. And as an example, we use color as a categorical differentiator. So on the screen, there are 4 groups of boxes. The first one on the left is brown and yellow. Second one is purple and orange. The third one is blue and red. And the fourth one is yellow and red. Now, if I were to tell you that these are actually 4 logos behind these boxes, and I would ask you, what industry do you think these logos are all representing? Some of you might have some guesses. You might be okay. Feel free to type them in, though. You can get some brownie points if you actually get them right. So can you guys guess? There's 4 logos represented in a single industry here. I'll give you 3, 2,
Seen a
1.
lot of people giving the right answer, actually.
Good. Well, that perfect. Yeah. So you can see UPS, FedEx, United States Postal Service, and DHL. Again, they're all shipping, distribution. Now, what's interesting here is that we unveiled the logos, and instantly you can sort of feel familiar with these logos, but there's no color represented. It's just black and white. So we're talking shape, symbolism, letters and names, but there's no color. Now, watch what happens when we add color back into it.
Cool.
Immediately, you can see that these colors sort of separate themselves from each other. If you go back to the black and white, they're all in the same group. There's unity between them. You add color, and boom, there's a difference between them. Okay, so designers use color as a categorical differentiator. Number 2, designers use color as scannability and visual hierarchy. All right, so on this slide, I've got, what's that, about 11 or 12 of these big statements that say, read me, read me, read me, read me, read me. But what does your eye go to first? I would bet that your eye went down to the bottom right that has the words made you look, that's in smaller red type. And why is that? The type that is smaller in red, it's 16 points, and the readme text is actually 45 points. That's 3 times as big, but obviously you're going to go to the one that's smaller in red because our brains are set up in a way to account for awareness and for danger, and also we use that in the design world to account for things like scannability or to intentionally create a sense of visual hierarchy. So it can be a problem when we're asked to change our colors or change our size of fonts just for accessibility. But we'll get more into that. So the third one here is that we as designers use color to establish sense of aesthetics and vibe and personality. And on this screen basically is just that. It is some old vintage typography set in similar tones. You know, the image in the middle has the blue, the light blue and the dark blue and the whites, all of the same tonal family. Mm. And, you know, color, it's used to create harmony, balance, visual comfort and design, that type of thing. It's a really huge deal, okay? Another example is that we use color for tone and detail and nuance. And the icon on the left here actually is a Microsoft icon for the cloudy, sunny day on the left. And it's just black and white, single outline. And then the one on the right actually is an icon I created for Microsoft that it has the nuance of the, let's see, the cloud detail, the bright color of the sun. There's subtle textures and tones. So they're the exact same image, but they're represented differently. And as designers, we need to be able to have an icon that's just black and white in our back pocket. And then there's going to be scenarios where we do want to have a fully colored, fleshed out graphic that we use as well. So there's a difference in detail and nuance, okay? And we'll get more into that later. Lastly, I want to say that color is used for psychology and for brand perception. Up to 90% of our initial impression of brands come from color. That's huge. 93% of consumer purchasing, their decisions come from the visuals alone. So color can increase brand awareness recognition by 80%. So that's a big deal. And on this illustration, you can see that we've got 2 sets of logos. On the left side, they're vibrant and they're, you know, enticing. And, you know, we've got Starbucks, which is green. We've got McDonald's, which uses red and yellow. And then Burger King down here. These are vibrant, beautiful colors. And then on the right side, the 3 colors are the IRS, Postal Service, and IBM, which are all, what is this color? It's, what is it called? I don't know, navy blue or whatever. But either way, there is a intentional distinction made between choosing this blue color, this corporate blue. Everyone sort of gets along and chooses blue, and it basically it's a sense of comfort and formal and structure versus the brands on the left that give you that excitement in your brain that want you to act impulsively. And so there's psychology behind all this stuff. So it can be a big deal. And the pain points from the design perspective is that, it's like we don't want to be told how to do our jobs, right? And the ego can get in the way on this. And that is on us to quiet and to be open to hear other perspectives. And that's on me to put down any of that pride and say, okay, well, what are they getting after here? A good designer, basically, they will know how to make something work. And that's our job. So that's a pain point. But sometimes it's not the designer. Sometimes it's actually the company owner or the small business owner that's like, I just love vibrant green. It needs to be neon green. And then we have all these issues with creating a website with headlines with neon green and all that stuff. But they want it regardless, despite causing legitimate issues. So sometimes it's not the designer. And then sometimes it's not the designer or the CEO or whatever. Sometimes it's the system limitations of the technology that you're working with, whether it's a web browser that only allows certain, actions, or whether it's something like Shopify or WordPress that, they've baked in styles where you can only use a certain color for a call to action button or something like that. So sometimes, you need development help and all that stuff. But I think what it comes down to is, from the design perspective, there can be fear. Okay, so just pulling back my well-crafted facade mask here, I just want to say that flattening down these beautiful designs into like what can seem like black and white, like that just kills my sense of nuance and just my job that I come to bring to the world is creating beauty. So sometimes I get afraid that you're just asking me to make everything black and white, and that's not inspiring to me, and that also doesn't help create beauty in the world, and it doesn't help differentiation when we're trying to create brand personality. So those are the pain points for a designer. The pain's real, and I know that on the accessibility side, you guys feel the pain as well, because it's not like you're wanting to cause a bad day. You're wanting to help. You're wanting to make sure that everyone can read and use it and all that stuff. And so at the end of the day, the question is, if brands are creating or spending so much time and effort on creating these brand colors, and then they cause accessibility concerns, like, why can't we just use the brand color anywhere? So, Deneb, let's throw this on to you here, and let's hear from your side. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a great question, and I'm really glad to have heard all of that Mark brought up regarding how a designer thinks about color. It really is very illuminating, and I think that's why I asked this wonderful expert that I have at my beck and call to do this with me. Because this is the question, right? Why can't we use the brand color that Mark has invested so much thought and emphasis on to get just right? Why can't it be used anywhere we want? And the answer is, well, my priority as an accessibility professional, with many of you on the call today as well, I'm sure, is creating fully accessible content for all users equally, right? And we need to think about what that means to be fully accessible for everybody. So to answer that, or to kind of delve into that, let's look at the history of color accessibility standards a little bit, right? This will probably be a review for most people, but um, that's okay. In 1991, the first website came out, and it just looked like a page of text because that's what it was, right? There was no styling, and so there were no color or anything like that. It was just black and white text, black text, I guess, on a white background. Um, or maybe it was green text on a black back. Anyhow, it was, because it was old computers, right? But
Got
in
me.
96, CSS1 came out, and all of a sudden, designers and developers and designers could style their websites however they wanted. And for a while, it just kind of was like the Wild West. They could do whatever they wanted. They didn't think about how it affected users because it just wasn't a thought process. But in 1999, that's when the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 1.0 came out. Um, and WCAG 1.0 said that developers needed to ensure that foreground and background color combinations provide sufficient contrast when viewed by someone having color deficits or when viewed on a black and white screen. So that was the official standard in WCAG 1, which seems actually kind of vague, right? What does that mean that it has to have sufficient contrast? It's not much of a standard. Um, it's just kind of uh, an aspiration almost. Now, there was an additional bit of information that they included in WCAG 1, which was a quick test to see that standard or aspiration was met. And the quick test was that you would take your website, you'd print it off on white paper with in black ink, and then you take it to a photocopier, photocopy it a few times, and see if it had degraded so much that you couldn't read it. Right? That was the way you checked the color contrast. Right? It wasn't very helpful. But in the next, well, I guess 9 years later, in 2008, WCAG 2 came out. And the requirement there is the one that most of us, I think, are probably familiar with, which is that the visual presentation of text and images of text has a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1. Right? So that's the 4.5 to 1 ratio that we all know and love. Well, or that sometimes would frustrate the designers in our lives. I know Mark pushed back against this on me several times, saying that's not a good standard because, anyhow, the next point here is that when WCAG or WCAG 3.0 comes out, it's rumored, nothing set in stone yet, of course, but it's rumored that it's going to use the APCA value rather than just a simple contrast ratio. And I don't exactly understand APCA super well. I mean, we've got a little bit of time to figure it out before WCAG 3 comes out, but I think it's going to deal with nuance and the amount of, I don't exactly understand. Anyhow, it's another standard, but we'll see. Apparently Jody thinks it's so much better. And so I'm excited to get into it. I think it is going to do a better job because there are times when something meets the contrast ratio standard and still doesn't look real easy to read. We'll see. Okay. Anyhow, the issue is it's problematic to use some brand colors in most situations for accessible content. That's my concern as an accessibility professional. That's problematic.
Yeah.
So let's look at some of these examples together, Mark. Tell me what you see, and I'll tell you what I see.
Okay. Coca-Cola. We've got a big, beautiful, classic logo. It pops, right? That's our keyword. Does it pop? It sure pops. So when I think about logos, I'm wanting to make sure that it pops. I'm wanting to make sure it's got high contrast, that it's beautiful, that it's all that stuff. So this one's been around since, 1887 or something like that, with a few small changes. Big, it's legible. Like, surely this meets accessibility, right, Deneb?
Well, let's look at the colors there. So that Coca-Cola red is F40000000, which has against white a contrast ratio of 4.33 to 1. So for large text, yeah, that works fine. But for anything regular size text and not bold, it's got a problem.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yep.
Okay. All right, let's move on. So Baskin Robbins here. Again, when you're making logos, you want to make sure that you've got different colors represented, and they use the purple as their word mark, and then they've got the numerical section icon that is a lighter pink that basically they've done a good job of using multiple colors, but what do you think about the accessibility side of these colors?
Well, the pink has problems, right?
Yeah.
Against white, it's only a 3.19 to 1 contrast ratio. So it would not be able to, yeah, for regular size text, it's not going to work. Um, and the pink on indigo, so if you use both those colors together, it's an even poorer contrast of 2.14 to 1. Yep.
Yeah.
Though the nice thing is, the white against that indigo does create a contrast of 6.83. So you can use that the blue color of the Baskin Robbins, the indigo. You can use that in text if you want.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. Next, one of my favorite fonts of all time, or fonts, sorry, logos, I should say. You can see that little hidden arrow in the E and the X. I'm sure you guys have seen that little one. But what do you think from an accessibility standpoint? How do these colors flesh out?
Well, the orange has a contrast with white of 3.39 to 1. So once again, not good for regular size text. The against each other, the orange on purple is 3.69, so it's slightly better actually, but it
Yeah.
still doesn't meet that standard, so you couldn't use it on a button or something like that.
Okay.
The purple on white though, that works fine. 12.53. So that's a great contrast ratio. So you can use that purple anywhere you want in your content or else otherwise.
Right on. Okay. Let's move on to our friend Burger King. So this is their old logo. And again, getting into the psychology, these three primary colors, they pop, right? Lots of emotion coming from them. And I would say that like it's super legible. You can read it. So why doesn't this work? Or actually,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, it does. It looks beautiful. But that red against white is only 4.34. The yellow against white is only 1.87. So the yellow you can't use pretty much anywhere
Yeah.
on white. Um, the blue on white, once they do have a good color there that they can use. So that blue you could use in any of your text or anything.
Okay.
It's 7.67.
Now they did the rebrand recently, which I'm a big fan of,
Hmm.
and yeah, so let's walk us through those colors.
Yeah, so this one's kind of interesting. As a if you just take those colors, the red, the orange, and the tan of the Burger King's new logo, the red on tan is only a 4.32 to 1 ratio. So that's not high enough to use for regular size text. The orange on tan is only 2.39 to 1. And of course, the tan on white or something obviously wouldn't work. Um, but uh, it's interesting because although um, none of these colors kind of work all by themselves or with each other for content, the color migration did open the way for a new accessible brown that they use everywhere or many places on their website. Um, and so that brown is a highly contrasting color. So that on against 10, it's 11 to 1 basically. So that's a really good useful one. But tell me what you
Okay,
think about that.
yeah, let's hold on for a second.
Okay.
So we're looking at logos, and like I said, they seem to pop and they seem to look good. I mean, what do the rules actually say about logos? You know, about the text in logos.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So WCAG 2.2 success criterion 1.4.3 states that a text that is part of a logo or brand name has no contrast requirement.
Aha! Say that again.
All right. Text that is part of a logo or brand name has no contrast requirement.
So, brand colors don't need to be accessible, is that right? Obviously not, right?
Well, yeah. So the brand colors themselves in their own logo, you're right, doesn't have to be accessible, or they don't need to. Uh, because we have kind of these two considerations that we need to think about. If you can go to the next slide, we've got the brand color on one side. So here we have our two circles again from previous slides showing these two things, but we've got brand color on one side, we got content color on the other. So um, we need to think about these two things kind of separately. So tell us what you see here with Coke's site.
Right. So this is a screenshot I took last year on their from their website, and on the right hand side, you'll see they use the graphics or the imagery of the Coke and Diet Coke cans. Um, Beautiful, imagery. And then on the left hand side, they have a text box where it just says Diet Coke for everyone. So yeah, you're right. They're separating, the content
Mm.
from the imagery, and that is an interesting thing to point out here. So, like you were saying, on the left side, we've got all the branding. On the right side is the website, the content, and the UI. Okay, so separating those two, I think you're onto something here.
Yeah.
Okay, so this brings up something. I'm not sure how many of you guys have seen this documentary, but this is one of my favorite personal documentaries. And basically, it shows the relationship between two opposing uh, type of professionals, which is very similar to Deneb and I. But in this case, it's with advertising. It's the copywriter and the artist. And they come together. They're two different people, but when they come together, they create something beautiful that basically would not be possible if they were not to work together. And so on your own time, I highly suggest um, watching this one. It'll only help this discussion further. So,
And
okay.
the documentary he's talking about is called Art and Copy by PBS.
Thank you. Yeah, that's right. I think it's on Netflix, but anyway.
Oh, cool.
Okay, Deneb, let's keep going.
Okay, so if the question is, do brand colors need to be accessible? The answer is no, the colors themselves, there is no requirement that they be accessible, but the requirement is that the content be accessible. So this does come from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the WCAG. So the question is, what is content? And the answer is any information that's communicated through the text of the site is content. Um, so coming through the text. So let's come up with some examples here. For example, paragraphs, headings, links, and buttons. These are kind of the most important elements of content, I think. And so what the guidelines say is that those things need to be have an acceptable contrast ratio with its background. So
All right.
paragraphs, headings, links, and buttons.
All right, let's take a look at some examples here.
Great. Okay, so we've got a screenshot here of a website. And it's a lawyer's website, but one of their brand colors is a very vibrant orange. And so they're using this orange as the heading color. So their site has legal and accounting malpractice, litigation experience, appellate representation. If you have no color contrast sensitivity problems, these really jump out at you, and that's what they liked, apparently. But so because many people can still read it, but in our next slide, I actually decreased the contrast substantially, showing that now it's very washed out and very difficult to read um, that those headings. That orange is super hard.
Yeah.
Um, and I did this, I decreased the contrast of this image by 67% because statistically, that's the amount of contrast sensitivity that is lost in most people between ages 20 and 60. So when you're young, your eyes are young, you can see that contrast very well. Even if there's less contrast, it pops for you. But as your eyes age, um, your sensitivity to the contrast decreases.
Gotcha. Yep. And I'm 42 now, and I'm starting to slowly experience that, unfortunately. So, all right, let's jump to the next one.
Yeah, okay. So on this one, we've got some links, and this is one place where I think people go wrong a lot is they think, oh, well, I'm supposed to change my link color to be my brand color.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of one of the standard things that many platforms will kind of do by default.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but in this case, this pink against the tan background was only had a 2.66 to 1 contrast ratio, which is too low even though it was larger text.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also a date below the post, like this blog post had a date, and it was a gray, which only has a 2.03 to 1. So
It's like a
um,
double strike. It's like a small,
yep,
super small text, and then also super low contrast
yeah,
gray. Yeah.
yeah, yep.
All right.
Well, and I like this one because this was actually our website, SeaMonster Studios website.
I
Um,
did not do this, by the way, for the
no,
record.
this was done before Mark, but our owner is very conscious. Wes is super thoughtful about making sure things work, and he just didn't think about it. Like it wasn't something that he had even thought about. It probably came from the theme. And so um that just highlights the point that lots of times it's going to come just sort of naturally, and we're not going to think about it, but we need to think about it, and we should help website owners to think about it.
Right.
Okay, let's look at buttons real quick. Next slide, we've got a button that has white text on a yellow button. Again, it might have come sort of default. Yellow was one of their brand colors, and so it was maybe the secondary color, and the theme said, "Well, put your secondary color here," and it just made that button that. Um, but it only has a 1.64 to 1 ratio, so it doesn't work. For some people who have contrast sensitivity loss, if you go to the next slide, it might look like this, right? Squinting, you can almost make out that it says book now,
Yeah.
that button, but it's just very difficult.
Right.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
Well, you're sort of preaching to the choir here, right? Like we understand that you guys all on this webinar sort of understand this problem, and we're just pointing out the obvious that you've already run into this stuff. But how do we persuade your boss to do this? And we want to basically give you three strategies to present that data. Number one, exactly that. Present the data. Go over what we just went through, and we're going to give you three more here. Number one is the data on color blindness and the statistics around that sensitivity loss. So on this screen, number one on the top, you'll see a grouping of apples, red apples on the left, green apples on the right. Well, on the screen or on the picture below, you'll see basically what someone simulating color blindness will see, and it just is a group of green apples. So, yeah, talk us through these statistics, Deneb.
sure. Well, the general statistic is that 4.25% of all people are colorblind, right? That breaks down to 1 in 12 men and 1 in 200 women, but it adds up to that 4.25%.
Yeah,
And so that's pretty substantial.
that's
That's
substantial.
a lot.
That's not, yeah, it's not a small number. The second one is myopia, so poor eyesight, and whether it's aging or there's injury or something like that. This image on the top right is a normal image of two boys holding two of their soccer balls, and then on the one below it, you can see that the image has been simulated and blurred out, and it's a lot harder to see any of the detail or any of the, it's just a lot fuzzier. And basically, this is what
Yeah.
we
Well,
experience.
yeah, myopia is nearsightedness. So someone who's nearsighted is going to see things more fuzzily like that. And it affects 30% of Americans. Um, but the
Yeah.
interesting thing to me was that there was a study showing that myopia has an inverse relationship with contrast sensitivity,
Hmm.
meaning the more myopic you are, or the worse your eyes are in that regard, the less contrast sensitivity you have. So they go hand in hand. And if 30% are myopic, that means 30% also have kind of a better likelihood for having decreased sensitivity.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Now the last one here, aging retina. So essentially what we see here is an old hoopty vehicle. This actually is my personal family van here, but it's an old Honda Odyssey, and the headlight you can see has aged and it's got yellowing, and basically the clear plastic has oxidized and has now there's this yellow sheen that's over on the top of that. All right, so talk us through how that relates to our eyes.
Right. Well, as the retina ages, or as the eye ages, I guess, the
Yeah,
amount of light reaching the retina declines 67%. So once again, um, between ages 20 and 60, and that's probably why they have a decreased contrast sensitivity is just not as much light gets there, and
yeah.
so not as much contrast is apparent.
And imagine driving down the road late at night in one car, which has bright headlights, and then
Hmm.
driving down the road at night when it's raining, like I was last night in this car. It's a lot harder to see, and you got to turn those brights on. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. So the aging retina, that's a problem.
Yep. And so, if we take all of those statistics together, that means that more than half of the population, we've got a pie chart here showing 16% aging retina, 30% myopia, 4.25% color blindness. That's more than half of the
Yeah,
population um, has some kind of visual impairment. And so, if you're going to, if you want to use some of those statistics with your boss, with your brand manager, and say, "Hey, this is a bit of a problem, right? We got to make sure we account for this."
yeah,
Just ask the question: you want to serve the 4.25%, the 33%, the 16%? Do you want half, or do you want the business and goodwill of this half of your visitors? And I think probably they'll say yes.
yeah.
Now, I think we've got 5 minutes to present the rest of our slides. We got to be done by 50, right? Lauren?
Roughly for Q&A around
Yeah.
11:50,
So
yes.
we're gonna have to fly.
Okay, let's fly. Number two, peer pressure. If you think about it, there's been a lot of changes lately. Websites are going more in this direction. So all of these companies have changed things. So Apple, you can see what they do. They're separating their art from their content. They do a really great job of that. You guys saw Coca-Cola previously, basically just separating this content into content boxes. Same thing with Microsoft. So they've got their content on this floating white box. They've got text in, or I'm sorry, they've got imagery beneath it, and basically just letting the user interface separate things. Now, Baskin Robbins does the same, but in backwards, it's got the light text on the dark one. So if you need some more personality, you can still do that. It's not just about keeping everything black and white.
Hmm.
And again, our friends here, the awesome redesign of Burger King, they're using photography, they're using these color bars, so there's lots of personality still, but they're just keeping all of their content there on the left. Now, what's interesting too is if you look at the red CTA button, it says order pickup. Everywhere on the screen that you see, they're using cream as the standard neutral, except for in this case, it's actually a white. If you were to zoom in, the order pickup button is a white. So they're
Hmm.
actually, their brand style guide might say we use cream as white, but this is an example of how you can change things a little bit to get things more accessible.
Yep.
And the last big thing takeaway I want to give you is something called tints and shade ramps. And this is something we're pulling from our brand design toolbox, okay? So it's called a step ramp. Now, the big picture of this is that digital color in what we're doing on websites, it's really just our best try at recreating the actual physical world around us, right? So the real world has infinite shades, and every single variable is basically a different shade or a different light. And you guys might remember this image here is that this went crazy around COVID time. People saw it one way or the other, and what you see is a image of a dress with either white and gold stripes, or depending how you see it, actually blue and black stripes.
Hmm.
And they did some studies, and basically they found that the way that you perceived it actually had a lot to do with the color that was around it. Okay, so the colors were perceived differently based on the lighting around it. So again, the accuracy of your color, of your brand color, is actually dependent on the conditions around it. So it's not as hard and fast as you might think. It's subject to lighting conditions. So you think about highlights and shadows. Here's a second example here, is that we've got a piece of paper on the left. And I mean, it looks like just a plain sheet of paper, right? And it is. It's not a trick. Literally just a white piece of paper on a desk. But from a digital standpoint, if you were to flatten that out and you take two colors samples from the exact same thing, you've got a light and you've got a dark. Okay? Now, let's look at this example in nature. So we've got a picture of leaves. The leaf in the sunlight is a bright green, and the leaf in the shadow is a dark green. Same leaf, different shades. Now, this principle can basically be applied with your brand color as well, okay? So you might have to sort of explain this in different ways, but you can do this through what we call tint and shade ramps. So the goal basically is we want to be able to have a
Hey,
versatile
Mark.
system.
Um,
Yeah.
we might have to let them go through these next bunch of slides by themselves in our presentation when you get it, um, because we're about out of time. Can you jump to slide 50? No, 100 and 110. Sorry.
Okay, I'm going to just take 10 seconds and explain this because this is crucial.
Okay.
So you have your brand color, and if you add 20% steps of white, you have an entire spectrum that basically is justified by the highlighting of your brand color. And also, you can do the same thing with your shadows, okay? So this is huge. If you want to talk to your brand guy, this is what you do, okay?
Mhm.
So with that said in mind, I'll jump ahead here. And let's
It was
see.
right there before that, 111 or 110. Okay, you talked us into it. So, once again, we know we're preaching to the choir, but if the question and the slide just before this is where can we use the original brand colors, right? Where the brand people are attached to those colors. So where can they be used? And the answer is anywhere that's not content bearing can use that brand color. You can put it in there in many places in your website to get that color in people's eyes and their minds that they associated with your brand, like Coca-Cola did. That was a whole, like their entire image on that one half of the screen was using that really vibrant red, their brand red, because that part was not content bearing. But the longer answer is it's up to your brand team. We've created a list of possible treatments and examples. Again, may have to skip through some of these. You'll have to go through them on your own because I think we are officially out of time. But there are a bunch of places. There's also, um, let's see, if so like patterns and images. This is really great stuff here. So I do encourage you to go through this on your own and email us with questions. Um, but let's review for us those three takeaways, Mark.
All right.
So what can they
Present the
do?
data.
Mhm.
Number two, realize that accessibility design, it doesn't have to suck. It can look great. We can work together to make it great. And then lastly, keep the content fully accessible and separate it, right? And then basically us coming together and working
Yeah.
together is going to be a win-win for everyone, right? And that's the goal of what we're trying to do.
Yep.
Anything to add, Deneb?
No, just that one before this where it says let's set the world on fire. We call this presentation accessible Firebrand. Let's all become firebrands, right? Let's bring these two spheres together and use them together to do great things. Okay. So there's after the thanks slide is our contact information. Deneb at SeaMonsterStudios.com, Mark at SeaMonsterStudios.com. But then what questions did you guys have?
All right, we did have a couple questions. First and foremost, thank you both for sharing your presentation. This first question I grabbed from the chat. It says, if there was a button with a logo on it and the logo is not accessible, is this a violation?
Hmm.
A button with a logo. I have never seen a button with
Oh,
like a CTA that has their logo
just
on
the
it.
logo.
I wonder what the action would be if it's like supposed to link over to their brand or something like that. I would
Yeah.
almost
Well,
always use a
but
white logo. So that's an interesting question. Keep going, Dan.
I was gonna say, for example, lots of times your logo will be the link back to your homepage. And so I think that's kind of the gray area. I don't think it would be a technical violation because it is part of your logo, and hopefully it would be recognizable simply as your logo, even if it's illegible to the person. So great question.
And in the design world, usually we're always going to have a white, black or white logo. And when you are on top of a color like that, you're going to use a one color logo. And so
Okay.
hopefully they're doing that.
So you'd use the the super high contrast
Yeah.
logo. Great question.
All right, the next question is, why doesn't logo slash brand colors need to be accessible due to printing CMYK conflict that may not be manageable in comparison to web?
Um, as to why the the web in the web content accessibility guidelines it is an exclusion, I don't know. I wasn't privy to those discussions. I would guess it's because that's very personal to the brand, and so they can, it's their thing. I don't know why but it is an exclusion. Well, and maybe it is because we're talking about the web content accessibility guidelines. So uh, the content of the site needs to be have accessible colors. The imagery, not necessarily as much so much. But that's speculation. I don't know for sure.
Perfect. We have time for one more question, and this one is, can you address the issue of luminance? Why certain white and orange combinations are easier to see than black and orange combinations,
Uh,
even though black and white passes contrast ratios better?
ah. Well, Mark can maybe explain this, but I do know that this is one of the big reasons why the APCA is probably going to be the standard in 3.0, because of that issue. But Mark, can you explain that? Why is it easier?
No.
No.
I think it's just one of those. Our eyes have certain cones, and different colors they have more luminance to them from on a physiological level. And I have noticed whenever I'm doing a design around like Halloween or in those themes, yeah, you're right. Like the orange versus white thing versus the black versus orange thing, even though the contrast works out, for some reason visually it's not the same, and which is sort of why you'll get some pushback from designers because I mean, let's be honest, these are guidelines and we're trying our best to basically put a number on something that is
Mhm.
not fully, you can't fully uh, whatever the term is put a number on something, and the goal
Yeah.
is for it to be legible. I think both of us agree on that and useful. And sometimes there's just these quirks, there's these little anomalies, and I think this is one of those. To be honest with you,
Yeah, and I will mention that this was actually one of our big pain points between Mark and me initially. Was I said it's got to meet the contrast ratio, and he said, but that's not a good ratio, right? It doesn't make it necessarily easier all the time.
yeah,
Um,
the legality around the number itself. It's like at some point we had to create a number, and whether it's
yeah,
1.4.5 or 4.499997, which determines it's the whole thing between the spirit of the law and the letter of the
yeah.
law.
which is why I'm kind of excited about APCA too. I saw somebody in the chat was really excited about that. And I'm excited about it too. I just don't understand it yet.
Well, thank you both. I think that's all the time we have
Mhm.
for today. I'd like to thank you both for presenting, as well as thank our captioning and ASL team for being with us today. We have one more webinar before we close out the year coming up on December 11th, and it's how to make sure your partners provide accessible content and components. That is going to be a part of our professional education webinar series. And thank you everyone for joining us today.
Great. It's
Thank
been
you
a
so
pleasure.
much.